Hi everyone, Caryn Zinn here, the dietitian, bringing you some information and some chat about gut health this evening. I wanted to ask if anyone was there, how they're going during their lockdown period, and how you're going generally. I hope you guys are making the most of the situation and are doing well. I know I'm going to talk about gut health, but I just thought I'd let you know how I've been going for the last little while since our lockdown. And I'll have to say to you that 90% of it has been really good. 10% of it has been not that good. So I started off with the first few days of being not so much unsettled, but unsettled with my food intake, with my alcohol intake, and getting used to working from home. I love working from home, but not all the time. So that's how it started for me. And after a few days of kind of really feeling sorry for the situation and myself in it, I decided that it was now time to create some structure around food, some structure around when I was going to take a break for my work habits and what I was going to eat and when I was going to drink. So I allowed myself the time for the first few days to get into it and feel sorry for the situation and turn to food and a little bit extra alcohol for the emotional support, and that was that. And now I am right back into some good structure now, which has been reasonably easy to do. This week Wednesday, I had a total meltdown. I'm not entirely sure what that was all about, but I allowed myself to eat food that wasn't ideal, and to not focus on work because I just couldn't. And part of the angst was because I was going shopping and I wasn't looking forward to doing that, and it turned out to be reasonably painless, but I had a total meltdown, and then from Thursday onwards it's been fine. So hopefully you guys are taking the wins and just navigating through the times that are more challenging and more difficult. And that brings me on to the next area of gut health, because it is totally related to what we're going through at the moment, even if you don't have any gut health issues. So I would imagine that all of you are aware that there's something called the gut-brain connection, or the gut-brain axis. And your brain and your gut are intricately related. There is a bi-directional communication, which means it goes both ways. And there's a network around the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord, and that has a connection with the enteric nervous system, which is the nervous system around the gut. And then, of course, we've got our gut microbes, the trillions of critters that are living in our system with us. So the gut-brain axis is complex, and what makes it even more complex is that it also interacts with the endocrine system. So this is where all our hormones, including stress hormones, come into the picture, and also with our immune system. And we know that at the moment our immune system it's getting a lot of press, and we need to make sure that we have immune system that is as robust as possible to prevent getting things like flus and obviously COVID-19, and if we do succumb, to allow us to get rid of it as efficiently as possible. So we want to have a very strong immune system. So just talking about the gut-brain axis again, we've got these signaling molecules which are created by our the critters that live in our gut, so by our gut microbes, and the cells of the intestines, and they send messages to your brain along that axis, and that influences your mental state, your health and well-being, your emotional functioning. And then the bidirectional relationship means that the signals also travel from our brain through to our enteric nervous system and our gut. So this is where our brain and our mental and our emotional state affects our gut function. And we know this from, it becomes really visceral when you think about when you are in a stress situation. Some people react by having gut-related reactions. So sometimes if you're highly stressed, it can cause diarrhea. So it can cause enhanced motility of the gut. When you are nervous, it can cause, you can get butterflies in your stomach, and that is a visceral gut reaction to what's going on in your brain. So there is, of course, a spectrum of neurological and brain-related conditions, if you like, ranging from some mild stress to some chronic stress, right through to your neurological conditions, like things like autism and depression, high anxiety, and other things as well. And a classic example of the extreme end of the spectrum with relating to diet is something called the GAPS diet. So the diet is actually called the gut and psychology diet, and this diet was developed by a doctor called Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride, who was a medical doctor. She had a child who had autism, and she was not happy with the nutritional the spectrum of nutrition treatment. So she actually developed this diet herself, which she has believed has resulted in decreased symptoms and better management of her child's autism. And the GAPS diet is reasonably well known. It's a very structured and very restrictive diet, but it is one that's out there, probably not quite in mainstream yet, but it can be useful for things like autism. But getting back to the point, what we do know at the moment is that we are all in a state of stress. Whether you like it or not, whether you feel it or not, we have stresses. Some of us have uncertainty stresses, but others have stresses about where their future income is going to come from, whether they are going to be in a job in a few weeks' time or not, and the future of the economics of the country. So very, very stressful situations. And what we don't want is that stress, we don't want it to impact on the gut more than it already does. So we want to make sure that we look after our gut. So I want to talk about two points. The first point is if you already have a gut problem. So if you already have a gut problem, you need to try and get to the bottom of the problem first, trying to come up with a diagnostic or diagnosis, which is quite tricky to do. Well, in fact, it's very tricky to do because the tests are imperfect, to say the least. But if you, and they range, of course, so they range from your functional conditions like IBS or irritable bowel syndrome, which can just be some non-specific diarrhea or constipation or a combination of both, or bloating. You could have SIBO, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or yeast overgrowth, or it could be more of a structural issue in your gut or your bowel, so inflammatory bowel disease such as Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. You might have diverticular disease, and there are a range of diets and things that can help these conditions, but it is important to get a diagnosis first. And a classic example, I want to give an example of something like SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. You have an overgrowth of some bacteria. Now, when you change your diet, you change your situation, the microbes in your gut change very, very quickly. Even 48 hours to 2 days it takes to get some change. How it changes, we're not entirely sure how it changes, whether it changes for the better in some people, for the worse in other people, and it also depends on the condition and the situation that you are starting out with. So we need to find out a lot more about the science of the microbiome. But what we do know is that if you have something like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, SIBO, and you get a diagnostic for SIBO, then it might mean that you need to just do more than just be just have a gut-friendly food profile, really. And what I mean by that is you might even need to get some antibiotics to get rid of that initial infection. So get rid of the problem, then rebuild the gut lining, and that can be things like improving the digestion, using things like apple cider vinegar or lemon juice, or even digestive enzymes. And then supporting the gut after that. So that would be where your kind of gut-friendly foods come in, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. Another example there, just to give you an idea. I'm not suggesting you guys have got any of these things or are going to get any of these things from stress necessarily, but I just wanted to chat them through. IBS management, dietary management. What's becoming more mainstream is the FODMAP diet. I'm sure some of you have heard about it. FODMAP stands for, it's an acronym, and it stands for fermentable oligosaccharide, disaccharide, monounsacharide, and polyols. And FODMAP foods are not particularly well absorbed. They're highly osmotic, and they're rapidly fermented by your gut bacteria. And the outcome of that is that you can get gas in the GI tract, you can get bloating, and you can feel very, very uncomfortable. And by reducing the foods that are high in FODMAP, that can help to start healing the gut. FODMAP diet is something that is said to be temporary, can be quite restrictive, tends to be overall lower in carbohydrate, because a lot of these FODMAPs do come from carbohydrate foods. But if you are on FODMAPs for a while, the gut is supposedly meant to heal, and then you can start eating these foods again. There are mixed outcomes. A FODMAP diet can be particularly useful, but not necessarily as useful for everyone. So that is if you have a gut issue. Look, if you have things like inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, diverticular disease, we're looking at diets that are focusing on reducing the overall inflammation. So anti-inflammatory diets, autoimmune paleo is one of them, specific carbohydrate diet is another one. And these are, again, they've all got different levels of extremities. And there's not a lot of science around all of these. There's a little bit of science, but people find these diets to reduce gut inflammation and sometimes systemic inflammation to be quite useful. Okay, so I want to have just close on that. So that is for people who have gut issues. You need to look after your gut issues, particularly in these times. The second point I want to talk about is if you don't have gut issues, but you've got this, we've all living with this stress at the moment. So let's see what we can do on a daily basis to look after our gut. Now, diet is just one of the key things that you can do. I say that with I'm not sure what word I'm looking for, but it's really important, so I'll say it again. Diet is only one of the things that can be helpful in this instance. Pre-Cure is all about lifestyle medicine. It's all about the importance of diet and sleep and stress management and regular exercise and getting regular sunshine, vitamin D. And this is the prime example of when these things all matter. To make sure that we have a very robust immune system, particularly under these conditions. But I'm going to talk about diet, because sleep and stress and exercise is covered on other evenings. So what do we want to do? We want to look after our gut. So so here's some key points. Eating whole foods. We've heard it all before. Avoiding foods with high inflammatory factor. So these foods are packaged, processed, junk foods, a lot of additives in our foods, particularly foods that are high in sugar, and particularly foods that have processed industrial seed oils. So we want to avoid that, and we want to go straight to the eat whole foods. Shopping the ends of the supermarket will be very useful now, because we want to get in that supermarket and we want to get out of it as quickly as possible. The best way to do that is to shop for the whole foods on either end and not be tempted by the middle. We want to be friendly to our gut and give it some natural prebiotics and natural probiotics. Prebiotics, for those who might not know, are the fibers in the foods that you feed to the probiotics, and the probiotics are the actual bacteria that live in your gut. So let me talk about probiotics first. So the natural probiotics that you can have, so it's the actual bacteria, comes from fermented foods, comes from yogurt. You'll see the lactobacillus and the other strains on yogurt and acidophilus, and those yogurts actually put bacteria in your system. Unpasteurized sauerkraut, I want to talk about that a little bit more. Kimchi, kefir, kombucha, tempeh, pickles, these are all natural probiotics. So they will populate your gut and keep it well populated. Like I said, this is for people who don't necessarily have problems. You might, if you do have a problem, you might still be doing some of these things, but here's some things that we can do to try and look after our gut in this instance. Natural prebiotics. So the prebiotics feed the probiotics. We find natural prebiotics from things like onions, garlics, leeks, Jerusalem artichokes, asparagus, not asparagus season at the moment, but anyway. Bananas, oats, apples, barley, konjac root. So we know that the low-carb people like to have konjac noodles from fiber. That's a really good natural prebiotic. Flax seeds, really good natural prebiotic, good to know. Seaweeds, lentils, cashew nuts, and chickpeas can be very, very useful. And I want to talk briefly about synbiotics. So a synbiotic is something that has both a probiotic and a prebiotic, and there is one natural synbiotic, and it is, have a guess, you know the answer, I know you do, sauerkraut. Sauerkraut is amazing. It has natural pre's and natural pros. Now, this is a very expensive way of getting your sauerkraut, because this is quite expensive to buy. You can make your own sauerkraut. It is really, really easy. All you need is a cabbage. I have a purple one. And you need some salt. Okay, I'm going to put my finger over the word iodized, because when you make your own sauerkraut, you make your own fermented foods, you must not use iodized salt, because it interferes with the fermentation process. So non-iodized salt, sauerkraut, seriously, it's the easiest thing in the world. Just Google it. You basically chop up the cabbage, add some salt, massage it, clean hands, remember, very clean hands, massage. You wait 10 minutes and the fluid sort of rises, and then you bottle it very, very tightly, and put it somewhere in your kitchen or your cupboard, and actually when it's hot and humid, you can get a sauerkraut a little bit quicker. So for those people in the southern hemisphere, that this is a good time to make sauerkraut. What else did I want to say? Sauerkraut can be ready between 2 and 14 days, really. So if you are bored, or if you're looking for something to do with your kids while you're on lockdown, making sauerkraut and making different ferments, adding things, incredibly useful. Very incredibly useful thing to do with your time and with your cabbage. Okay, Himalayan salt would be fine because that doesn't have iodine in it. So I just picked up on that one. Okay, and then the last point I wanted to make was resistant starch from carbohydrate foods can be particularly good for gut health. So resistant starch functions in a similar way to your soluble fermentable fiber. It helps, basically it's not absorbed by the body, but it is fermented by your gut bacteria, and what your gut bacteria do is eat this starch that we don't digest and produces short chain fatty acids. which is like what fiber does. So things there include cooked, cooled potatoes. So that's really important. You cook the potatoes and they need to be cooled. So if you want to make some baby potatoes, put them in your salad lunch the next day, and that can be very helpful. Oats, cooked and cooled rice, beans and legumes, and dried bananas. Those are your resistant starch, your key resistant starches. For those people who want to minimize their carbohydrate because they're on a low carbohydrate diet, or those on keto want to have high circulating levels of ketones, which is really anti-inflammatory. Again, something that's looked favorably upon in this, where we're at the moment. It might be that you use very small amounts of your cooked cool potatoes, and you do other things like making sauerkraut, which has minimal carbs in it, to look after your gut. So that's it from me. I want to sign off and I want to just say two things. One thing is diet goes hand in hand with important amounts of sleep, optimal amounts of sleep, with stress relief, and hopefully you've got your stress relieving points there. You know what you can do to help you to manage the stress, and exercise and making sure you're getting some vitamin D. Look after your gut using these points that I mentioned, and make sure that relationship between the brain and the gut is functioning so that you are doing the best for your immune system under these conditions. And the second thing I wanted to say is take care of yourselves, be kind to yourselves. Don't necessarily use it as an excuse to eat terribly and to not exercise. But be kind to yourself, because being hard on yourself in these situations and berating yourself for not having 5 alcohol-free days during the week might indeed cause extra stress, and we want to keep that nicely under control. So take care. I will be back online at some point to talk to you about other interesting things. See you later.